So it's been over a decade since Black Widow was first introduced into the MCU in Iron Man 2. And my immediate reaction at the time was, this character needs a solo movie. And there were a lot of rumors, but nothing happened, and then nothing kept happening. Except the larger story of the MCU kept moving forward, and spoilers I guess if you're not caught up on all of that stuff. But it all culminated in the 2 Avengers movies a few years back. And it's no secret that I loved those movies, and I loved what they did with the entire story too. But part of that story was the fact that Black Widow, aka Natasha Romanoff, died. Which meant that it was a little bit late for a solo movie now, except they made one anyway. The story just takes place in the past, right after Civil War and the whole Sokovia Accord. But not gonna lie, the timing of this definitely put a significant damper on my excitement for this movie. It just felt like it might be too little too late, and like they missed their opportunity to do this when it was actually relevant. However, I was still very curious to see what they would do with this anyway. I still like the character and Scarlett Johansson as that character too. And there was honestly no reason this still couldn't be a good movie, all it needed was a good script. Now unfortunately it doesn't have a particularly good script, and that becomes apparent fairly fast. But what becomes apparent even faster is the fact that this isn't particularly well directed or edited either. Because we start with a little opening sequence that gives a bit of a backstory to Natasha and her sister and sets up the rest of the story. But that whole sequence felt very clumsy from start to finish, and it was not a strong way to kick things off. I was not a fan of that intro, and I also noticed that some of the effects weren't great either, even early on in the movie. And that's a running theme here, the quality of the effects is very uneven. A lot of the time they look good, sometimes even great, but a lot of the time they also look genuinely cheap. So yeah, from a more technical standpoint, I was already disappointed with this within the first few minutes. And it doesn't get much better from there when we jump into the current timeline and the actual story. It honestly felt kinda like several scenes setting things up further were missing. Because we're just dropped into the middle of it all when it comes to the actual plot, and it feels very messy. And at times early on I just found myself going, wait, what's going on here? But then even worse than that, I realized I didn't really care. And that was one of the main issues I had with this movie in general too. I just didn't care about anything that was going on, I wasn't invested in it at all. I didn't care about the characters or the story, and I would say I was borderline bored with it for a large chunk of it. And it's not even that it's straight up terrible, I mean, I don't think it's a good movie. But there's just nothing compelling or engaging about this movie to me. Like, it just felt completely pointless, empty, devoid of purpose, and honestly unnecessary. It didn't really add anything to the MCU, and it didn't really develop the character or do anything all that interesting with it. And this is what I waited over a decade for, something completely bland and mediocre at best. Not to mention that it's been 2 years since the previous movie, and this is what they're gonna kick things off with? Yeah, that doesn't bode well for the future of the franchise. They need to do better. Because this is easily one of my least favorite MCU movies to date. And honestly, looking at the upcoming slate, there's not a ton that gets me excited. At least we have Spider-Man coming out in December, and Doctor Strange might be interesting too. And I am curious to see what Taika Waititi does with the next Thor movie. But none of the new characters and new movies involving them look all that great to me. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I always hope for the best, even when my instincts tell me to fear the worst. But if this one is any indication of what's in store, the MCU is in deep trouble. Because not only did I think this was a fairly bad movie, there are some even more concerning stuff here as well under the surface. Because the woke culture stuff has started to creep into these movies to the point of being extremely blatant. And that's just not why I watch and usually enjoy these movies. I want to be entertained and preferably emotionally engaged in the stories as well. I don't want to be preached to, and I don't want to be hit over the head with some kind of agenda either. And I know a lot of people feel the same way, and if they keep going down this road, well, it's just gonna be the downfall of the most successful franchise in cinematic history. It's plain and simple. And that would indeed be a shame, but the trend seems very strong, so let's see where it goes, I guess. Anyway, I didn't think this was a very good movie, although not completely awful, so I think I'm gonna give this one a solid 4. Boop. But should you watch it? It's up to you, but I don't think it's worth the time. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a nobody on the internet who also happens to not be your dad. But hey, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen it? Did you like it? Let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up or sub to the channel because that would be fantastic.